Ever get that feeling, like when someone promises you something huge, something that could totally change things, and then, well, nothing really happens?
Oh, yeah. You see that everywhere. A big gap between, like, the potential for change and actually getting it done.
Exactly. And, from what we've been looking into, that feeling of, okay, is anything actually going to change? That's something a lot of people in Ghana have experienced, especially when it comes to reforms, the political kind.
Right.
That's exactly what brings us to today's deep dive. We're taking a close look at this document. It's called, get this, The Process for a Constitutional Reset Must Start.pdf.
Catchy.
Really lays it out there, doesn't it?
Mm.
And basically, it's this really strong, you could even say passionate, push for some serious action. They want to reform Ghana's constitution, like from the ground up.
Big changes.
Huge. So what we're going to do today is break this whole thing down for you, really get into what's making them so urgent about this constitutional reset, what kind of timeline they have in mind, and really what they think is at stake if things don't change. Like right now, it's like we're getting a front row seat to, all the hopes and worries around this whole push for change.
Yeah, totally. And it's not just some neutral analysis either.
Yeah.
This document's got a definite point of view. You can see the authors are drawing on past disappointments, but also laying out what they want the future of Ghana's government to look like.
Okay, so let's rewind a bit first. The document starts by talking about those times when big reforms were promised, but then they just kind of fizzled out. They specifically mentioned the Mahama government, which I guess ran on this whole idea of a constitutional reset. Remind us, what were the big ideas behind that promise?
Well, the main thing was a big overhaul, a total revamp of how Ghana is governed, basically. It was all about rebalancing power. So giving regular citizens a bigger voice, more agency, making those key institutions stronger, more independent, so they could actually work how they're supposed to, and putting some checks on what a lot of people saw as, like, way too much power concentrated in the political system.
And from the sounds of it, that message really struck a chord with people. The document uses some pretty strong language, saying that a lot of Ghanaians felt like the 1992 Constitution, the one they have now, wasn't really protecting them. It says they saw it as a political weapon. What does that tell us about how it was actually working? In reality, I mean.
Well, what they're saying is the Constitution, as it stands, it became more of a tool for politicians to play games, instead of being this neutral set of rules that keeps things fair for everyone. And that can show up in a lot of ways. How power is divided up, how laws get made and interpreted. It could create a situation where things are rigged in favor of one political group over others.
Okay, I get it.
And that's not something unique to Ghana. I mean, you see it all over, these foundational documents, the ones that are supposed to be the bedrock of a country. They can get twisted, People use them to benefit their own side. It just shows you there's always this tension between what's supposed to be fair and how politics actually plays out.
Absolutely. So fast forward to now. We know there's a constitutional review committee. They've got Professor Prempeh leading it. Sounds like a step in the right direction, right? At least on the surface.
It's a start. And the document acknowledges that. They're not totally writing it off. I mean, they say, okay, the committee exists. They're having meetings, doing their thing. But then they raise this huge red flag almost immediately.
Uh-oh. What is it?
It's this deep worry that the whole thing's going to stall, that it'll end up being, as they put it, another one of those academic exercises. Lots of talk, no real action, no changes. And they even quote this line, reform delayed is reform denied. Like, bam, right in your face.
Really sets the tone, doesn't it? Makes it clear it's not enough to just have a committee. They want results, and they're worried about what'll happen if nothing gets done. And this brings us to something called the Constitutional Change Now movement. What's that all about? What's driving it?
So this movement, how it's explained in the document, it's basically like they're putting the government on notice. They're saying straight up, if they don't see some serious progress on these reforms this year, they're going to mobilize like a whole civic movement. They're ready to put the pressure on, constantly remind the government about what they promised, and make sure they're held accountable. You can tell they're not exactly trusting that the process will just naturally lead to quick action.
Yeah, it's a bold move. And they're backing it up with, like, a really specific timeline. It's not just, hey, we want change. It's, here's exactly what we want to see happen and when.
Exactly. They call it a realistic but firm timeline. And they're basically arguing, look, this can totally be done as long as the people in charge actually want to do it.
So let's walk through this timeline. What are the big dates they have circled on the calendar?
Okay, so first up, they expect the Constitutional Review Committee, the folks doing the groundwork. They figure they'll wrap up all their talks and stuff, write the report, and hand it over to the president. They give them until June 2025 for that. Then July 2025, that's when the executive branch, the president and all that, they're supposed to look over everything and then officially send a constitutional reform bill over to Parliament.
So that's a pretty fast action they're expecting in the next few months. What happens once that bill's in Parliament's hands?
All right, so from August to November 2025, that's their window for Parliament to talk it all out, maybe make some changes, and then finally pass all the parts of the Constitution that aren't, like, super locked in. There are some parts that are harder to change. But at the same time, they're also saying they want to get the ball rolling on a national referendum. That's for the really big stuff that needs a public vote to get changed. Those are the parts of the Constitution that are, like, extra protected. They often need a supermajority in Parliament or a referendum, or sometimes even both.
So basically 2 tracks happening at the same time. One for the easier changes, one for the big stuff. Makes sense. And what about the final stage of the plan?
They want everything wrapped up by December 2025. All the stuff Parliament has to do, the referendum, all done. The goal is to have everything in place so that the new reformed Constitution can go live in January 2026.
Wow. That's a tight schedule. They're really trying to fit a lot in. I mean, there's going to be tons of legislative back and forth, not to mention getting the public involved. And the document doesn't mince words about what they think about delays, does it?
Nope. They say pretty clearly any delays, unless there's a really, really good reason. They're going to see it as politicians messing around with the future of the country, basically, which honestly shows you just how little faith they have that things will move quickly unless someone forces them to.
Yeah, I see that. So we get the urgency, but let's get down to the nitty-gritty. What are the biggest problems with the current Constitution? The ones that are making them push so hard for this reset?
This is where they get into the specifics. Their main argument is that the Constitution, as it is now, it gives the president way too much power. And they're worried about, that power being misused, a lack of accountability. Then they talk about how the system, as it's set up, it tends to favor people who are loyal to a particular party rather than choosing people based on, whether they're actually good at their jobs. They're saying competence often takes a backseat to political connections. And another thing they highlight is how almost all the decision-making happens in Accra, the capital, which they argue leaves local governments out in the cold and makes it way harder to get things done at the local level.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And when they talk about unchecked executive power, what they might be getting at are things like how the president gets to appoint people or how much authority the president has in general. They're saying there aren't enough checks and balances to keep things fair.
So if these problems aren't fixed, what are they worried might happen? What are the worst-case scenarios they're laying out?
It's not a pretty picture. They're talking about systemic corruption getting worse, more and more political polarization, and basically people just losing trust in the government. They're arguing that all of that could lead to like a downward spiral, bad governance, political violence, even economic problems. It's kind of a scary thought when you realize how much impact these institutional problems can have.
For sure. And they use this really interesting phrase, liminal space. What do they mean by that?
It's a good way to put it. They're basically saying that Ghana, it's not a failed state, but it's not living up to its potential either. It's stuck in between. Like it could do so much more, but it keeps getting held back. These institutional problems we were talking about, the political stuff that's too entrenched, it's all dragging them down. They think this big constitutional reform, this is the key. It's how they break out of that rut and actually achieve what they're capable of.
So it's a call to action, basically. And they don't just leave it at that. They actually lay out what different groups need to do to make this happen. Who are the key players here?
They're big on leadership. They say it starts at the top with the president. They're calling on the president to really get behind this whole reform process. No hesitation. And then there's Parliament. They're saying, look, you got to put the good of the country above your own party squabbles. No more political games. This is bigger than that.
Yeah.
And then there's civil society. Those are the organizations that are, keeping an eye on things, making sure the process is transparent, that everyone gets heard. They say the media has a role too. They need to keep this whole issue in the spotlight, make sure people care about it, get them talking about it.
Right. And what about regular people? Everyday Ghanaians? What do they want them to do?
They make it clear this isn't just for the politicians to figure out. They're saying it's crucial for people to understand that this Constitution, it directly affects their lives, their rights, how they make a living, their future. They need to see how important this is and get involved.
So bringing it all together, what's the main message of this document? What are they demanding?
In a nutshell, no more excuses. They're tired of waiting, tired of promises that don't go anywhere. They want action, and they want it now, this year. And they're not messing around. They're saying if nothing happens, they're ready to push back big time.
And they don't exactly end on a subtle note, do they?
Not at all. They just come right out and say it. Constitutional change now, not tomorrow, not next year now. Like that sums up the whole thing, the urgency, the whole vibe.
Absolutely. So, listeners, here's the bottom line. We've gone deep into this document, and what we're seeing is a really strong push for big changes to Ghana's constitution, like now. And they've even laid out a very specific timeline, and the authors are convinced that if these reforms don't happen, and soon, there could be some seriously bad consequences.
Yeah, and what's really interesting is that this whole thing, this fight for constitutional reform in Ghana, it actually brings up a question that applies way beyond just this one situation. How often do we see things that need to change, important reforms, and they just, get stuck, whether it's governments or big organizations, even in our own lives? And what's that thing, that spark, that finally gets us from just talking about change to actually making it happen?
It really makes you think about the power of people coming together, right?
Absolutely.
This document is putting a lot of faith in the idea that if enough people demand change, they can hold the people in power accountable. It's a reminder that we all have a part to play in shaping how things work.
Definitely.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. See you next time.